The Magic in Your Mind by U.S. Andersen. This book is in the public domain. Chapter 4. Self-Mastery. Bernard Berenson is quoted as stating, "A complete life may be one ending in so full an identification with the not-self that there is no self left to die." Unquestionably, such spiritual aspiration is aimed at achieving an asymmetrical and proper relationship between the ego self and the supreme self, thereby arriving at the finely honed discipline of self-mastery. It is foolhardy to attempt control of the ego self through the ego self. Control connotes an element to be controlled and an element to exercise control, ergo a duality, and if the element to be controlled attempts domain over itself, there's no hope of achieving balance and direction in the personality. It is the ego self that must be controlled. It is the secret self which must exercise control, and true self-mastery is only arrived at when the individual achieves identification with the Supreme in the deeper recesses of his being. Then he is able, by a kind of unity with primal life force, to mold his own ego self, to exercise control over it, to knead and shape it to fit the ends of his life. Subconscious promptings. In each ego personality are thousands of subconscious urgings and instincts that tend to lead each of us around by the spiritual nose. We seldom, if ever, make decisions in an area of our consciousness that is free from the guilt, fears, and envies of our ego self. In consequence, we are never truly free to decide anything. Each decision wells up in us from the subconscious, reminding us below the level of awareness of some long-forgotten incident in which the ego suffered or had pleasure. And now, in this present instance, we must follow a path dictated by the ego reaction. And so we remain slaves to the past. It just is not possible to fight this reaction. Someone who has an inordinate fear of heights, for example, is never cured of his fear simply by being exposed to height. In fact, such treatment is likely to end in complete personality displacement, in an all-consuming fear hysteria. In the final analysis, such a sufferer is only able to overcome his fear by modifying the importance of his ego self, by displacing it from the frontal awareness of his consciousness, taking unto himself a deeper, more heightened sense of being through the identification with the secret self. And so his life begins to be guided by a mental and spiritual essence rather than a protoplasmic pain-pleasure reaction. The ego self is not master of itself, cannot be master, only deludes itself when it attempts such mastery. Most people are so entirely frustrated in the willpower area of their psyches that they seek desperately for deliverance from the all too apparent fact that they can never make themselves do what they want to do. If they are fat, for example, they know that they can grow slim by eating less, and they desire to be slim, but the psyche knots upon itself. The contemplated pleasure of being slim pulls against the present pleasure of eating, and the person eats and stays fat. As sorry as this may be in the matter of his personal appearance, it is nothing compared to the damage wreaked upon his already injured psyche. Now he knows that he cannot make himself do something that he ought to do, and he realizes all too well that this something to be undesirable, to be constructed of whim and mood and urge and sensualness, and he would be free of it, but cannot help himself, for he is attempting to make both subject and object out of the exact same thing, his ego self. In every action, as proved by physics, there is a mover and a thing to be moved. And by the very nature of space and energy and substance, an object cannot move itself without having something to act upon or against. The ego self is a thing to be moved, and it needs a prime mover, the secret self. Will equals intellect. Benedict Spinoza wrote, "The will and intellect are one and the same thing." In other words, we always do the thing that our understanding prompts us to do. Wishing does not make it so, and desire itself is only a key that unlocks the door of understanding. Knowledge moves the world. We cannot make ourselves or anybody else do anything that we are not capable of controlling through having a complete knowledge of all the factors involved. There is a law that follows all accomplishment, all attainment, all creation, all action, and that is the law of sacrifice. Nothing in this world is gained except by giving up something else. For nothing occupies and absorbs consciousness except that it displaces something else from the position. And whatever occupies consciousness receives the total energy and thought and imagination of the individual, absorbs him, as it were, and tends to come into his life as a complete and whole thing. You do not achieve your goal simply by wanting it. You achieve it primarily through thinking about it. Through thinking about it, you grow into understanding of it. And it is this understanding that delivers the goal in the end. The first kind of understanding that must be achieved is an understanding of the psyche, how it is divided, how it consists of the little I, the ego, and the big I, the secret self, how the relationship between these two determines the mental health and effectiveness of the individual. Self-mastery starts with the knowledge of mistaken identity, how you always have regarded yourself wrongly, and when you perceive, no matter how dimly, the giant person you really are, then you are able to regard with compassion the struggling little pygmy of your ego, to educate it, direct it, enlarge it, and so enlarge your life. No discipline can be without pain, wrote Havelock Ellis. And when the ego seeks beyond itself for a method of discipline and growth, there must be a breaking of bounds, a throwing off of chains, an expansion into new territories of aspiration. And all that is old and restricting must be left behind, and all that was routine and secure must be left there too, and the soul must take flight to a new and higher area of consciousness, on brave wings, daring and aspiring. And just as ecstasy is close to pain, so pain will come, then ecstasy, then pain again, and then insisting shell will be broken and the understanding will come. Self-discipline. The surface self has neither the scope nor the power to effect control of itself. When it attempts to impose such discipline, it achieves a kind of sideshow effect, remaining surface ego entirely but dressing itself in inhibitions and restraints that make it a grotesque parody of itself. Discipline is only possible through subjection. The individual must acknowledge a being or a principle greater than he in order to follow its guidance. Once such acknowledgement is made, then the whole life is caught up in the work that is involved. A power descends into the person from beyond him, and works are performed that before were completely beyond his scope. Most efforts at self-discipline are either pathetic or humorous, For the ego self simply is not capable of controlling the subconscious. The feelings that proceed out of the subconscious are the motivating forces of our lives, and all logic and reasoning are merely rationalizations after the fact that we must do certain things or must do them because we are so impelled or restrained by the subconscious. If we desire one thing continuously and its opposite keeps appearing in our lives, it is because our conscious desires do not conform to our subconscious desires. What we subconsciously desire is always delivered to us finally. No amount of willing or wishing or hoping can change this immutable law. For the subconscious has an umbilical tie with the Supreme Mind, and what is impressed upon it as a thought, an idea, a desire, is inevitably delivered into the world of the individual. Man against himself. In point of actual fact, it is impossible for the conscious mind to truly entertain an image that is in direct opposition to subconscious feelings. For instance, if we are afraid to dive off a diving board and resolve to overcome this fear, we must first condition the subconscious not to be afraid. If we do not, we have absolutely no chance of diving off the board. We may climb upon it, we may look down at the water, we may command our limbs to throw us forward through the air, but they simply will not respond. The fear-created image in the subconscious holds us back, protects us from the danger it fears. That conditioned image was placed in the subconscious by the impact of conscious mind. But imagination and a new conditioned image, free of fear, may be placed there also by conscious mind. And when it is, we are free to dive off the board and will. Willpower itself is a much overrated and misunderstood thing. Like a rattlesnake, the will often turns on its tormentor and delivers a painful laceration instead of the obedience sought. The story is told of the man who had become obsessed with the power of his mind and his will. He believed he was able to command all animate things to do his bidding, and now sought to prove the effectiveness of his thought upon inanimate objects. He seduced himself in his study, placed a small block of wood upon his desk, sat down in a chair opposite it, sought to move it by the power of his mind. 3 days later, relatives, failing to elicit response to their knocks and calls, broke down the door and found the poor man seated before his desk in a catatonic stupor from which he never recovered. Far from his having imbued the block of wood with his own volition, the block of wood seemed to have removed all volition from him. He never again, in the few remaining years of his life, evidenced any symptoms of will whatever. He had to be fed, dressed, completely cared for. He had expended his will completely. In deepest truth, will is not something we develop, but something that is developed in us. It gathers itself out of a vaster, more highly developed and universal consciousness, and makes itself manifest in us as a tendency to action or opinion that we have no desire to oppose. The vast majority of people in the world are not so much drivers as driven, and the unequivocal statement can be made that all those who fancy themselves as drivers are driven in reality. Will is not ego dominance, as modern fiction and drama would have us suppose. Inflated individuality is not the stuff that comprises the underlying motivation of the captain of industry, science, art, warfare. Rare is the man, and wise indeed, who rises to a pinnacle of world prominence and realizes that he has been brought to that point as an instrument, not as a prime mover, that he, himself, has been a servant each foot of the way, that something greater than he has moved in and through him to accomplish the ends that have been credited to him. Yet such a man is secure against the onslaughts of both time and change. And just because he is secure, just because he is equal to both victory and defeat, pleasure and pain, so his position in the world remains secure. For he has nothing further to learn by riding the eternal whirligig of opposites by which the one infinite and eternal intelligence plumbs the depths of its own knowledge and feeling. The truth about willpower. Usually, however, the world credits the man of accomplishment with a great determination, a great power of will to surmount obstacles. Modern civilization has a sense of drama, a sense of existence primarily derived from the stories of Cinderella, Frank Merriwell, and other exponents of the fairy tale that paints everything black or white, with white winning an ultimate and inevitable victory. Our sense of values is always deeply shocked at learning that our heroes are tarnished in other areas than the one that made them heroes. We applaud the ruthless heavyweight champion who bludgeons his opponents into insensibility. But when we find that he sometimes does the same thing to his wife, we cannot understand what motivates him. Yet exactly the same thing motivates him in one activity as in the other. In both, the man is the same. The only thing that changes is society's view of him. This duality of applause and condemnation exists in many other facets of our civilization. In wartime, we make a hero of the killer. In peacetime, we put him in jail. Houses and cities are hacked from unsettled frontiers by men who are able to take by ruthlessness and hold by strength. But these same men, when society becomes more static, are put in jail for preying on weaker citizens of the society they helped create. Of all passing standards, the most virulent is that which condemns people for being what they were born to be, as if it were their fault, and they could change into something different or better if only they would. We are so sure that we are masters of our fate that we have blinded ourselves to the fact that practically the whole world is in chains, and rarer than Diogenes, honest man and his counterpart, a free one. Will, in the end, does not belong to a man, but a man belongs to his will. There is in him, deep in the recesses of mind, spirit, consciousness, a motivation to be and to become. And for better or worse, it is his to live with all his life. This is his fate, and he cannot fly it, must face it or die. And in the facing of it, he meets himself and comes to know himself, or turn away from himself, is carried along to heights by the knowledge attained, or is crushed through the ignorance nurtured by his blindness. The path he follows is the path he must follow. Victory and defeat, success and failure, knowledge and ignorance are all there. He will experience them as he threads his way forward toward an ever greater self-knowledge. Willpower, then, is merely the shining through personality of an inner power to become something other than the role the individual is cast in at the moment. A man is born poor and impoverished and grows up to become rich and powerful, and we say he became successful through the exercise of a superior willpower. Yet, in most cases, such a man did not take stock and then consciously make the decision to strive for wealth and power. His environment conditioned his subconscious to it. The hurts and rebuffs of his childhood accumulated to place in his subconsciousness an inordinate desire for conditions of plenty and power, and so his entire adult life was spent in pursuit of such gratification. He is no more free than the man who attains no success at all. He was led to it through an uncontrolled subconscious. He is a prisoner still, a dweller in chains. The unrevealed quest. In our society, it certainly is considered eminently more desirable to wind up wealthy and in a position of power than it is to wind up stone poor and in a position of dependency. But if life is a spiritual quest and not a material one, then it matters little where on the scale of material acquisition a man arrives as long as he attains a wisdom about living and discovers his immortal soul. There is evident behind all living things an animate being resident in each, and it cannot matter much to this being which of its manifestations manages to accumulate more than the others. Life is going somewhere, is involved in a paramount but unrevealed quest, and those who conform most nearly to the ends sought are those who unravel the secrets, contribute to propagate understanding and enlightenment. The will to know, to understand, to grow, to become, is an integral part of each being. We cannot help ourselves in this. Each of us, however, must develop and expand along his own individual lines. No blueprint can be drawn by any man. We obey our own destiny best when we listen to our heart. No amount of conscious reasoning can prevail against this intuition, and only by following its dictates can we discover our true selves. Each person is involved in becoming that thing that his subconscious mind wills him to be. To understand why we often behave contrary to our wishes, it is necessary to perceive that the long lines of our lives are controlled by our subconscious desires, and the only way to change our destiny is to change the aims of our subconscious. When a bomb goes off, you do not behave in accord with your conscious mind, but in accord with your subconscious mind. And if in that instance you would like to behave like a hero, then you had better start right now conditioning your subconscious to make you behave bravely in the midst of noise, chaos, and confusion. In all emergencies, in all strenuous and heated action, we behave in accord with the subconscious, and no amount of willing or firm resolve will alter it, except if that resolve be put to work, educating the subconscious prior to the emergency. A quote by William Shakespeare: "Our remedies oft within ourselves to lie, which we ascribe to heaven." End of quote. Elevating consciousness. Withal, we can develop a kind of willpower, a willpower which resolves itself in freedom from reaction to circumstance by recognizing that there is a greater power which will bring us to our fullest culmination as human souls when we allow it to use us completely, when we become instruments for its manifestation on earth. Then we are able, by a kind of elevation of consciousness, to transcend the constant goadings and urgings of the subconscious, and to install in their stead the reasonable dictates of an illuminated intelligence. Then we rise above circumstance, above reaction. Then we take our fate into our own hands in the exact same measure that the ego abdicates us ruling power in our lives. The first step in the development of willpower is to seek outside the limited surface nature for the answers to all problems. One simply cannot instill the courage of a lion into the consciousness of a mouse, and a change in consciousness in the thing to be sought, whatever discord lies in the life. Attempting to coerce the ego through force of the will is like attempting to burst all the bubbles on the sea with a pin. A few will be broken, but the cause of their creation remains unchanged, and on they come. So the ego will, which at most is only a kind of suppressor, dams for a moment the urges and instincts of the subconscious, but they will break through eventually and wreak double havoc through their pent-up force. To the extent that we delude ourselves that the exercise of ego will can work a beneficence in our lives, we are led around by an illusion that must rob us eventually of all power and direction through being absolutely unable to provide any kind of control. Instinctive avatars. Much of the suffering in this world is caused by the concealed guilt buried deep in the subconscious of unhappy persons who have set about remaking themselves by exercising ego will against their defects. They bury these failures in the psyche where untold damage is done by repressing energy, robbing them of their natural vitality. The will of the ego, when used to chain the natural energy of the self, restrains the whole personality, replaces boldness with timidity, optimism with pessimism, energy with lassitude. There is little help for the man who enslaves himself through bondage to the ego, through acceptance of restriction and limitation and lack, as delineated by the necessity of conforming to some pre-existent standard that he was never made to conform to and could never truly conform to, no matter what. We sometimes see men in whom life flourishes hugely, men who are cast in heroic mold, whether their statures be large or small, for they fit into no pattern, are restrained by no fears or apprehensions, but seem by some stroke of great good fortune to possess themselves completely, confidently, compellingly. These men have not suffered to learn the do-nots of life. They are unrestrained outlets for the energy and constructiveness of that constantly growing and evolving force that lies behind creation. Their appetites and enthusiasms are large. They take all into their scope, use all to grow by. They measure obstacles as opportunities to prove their strength, to improve their mastery. These lucky ones live in the lap of a nurturing and guiding fortune, for they have not cluttered their subconscious storehouses with a million chains and restraints. Life finds in them the joyous outlet it seeks, and these instinctive avatars are carried in a rush to the tops of their professions, are recognized and gathered around wherever they may be. Such dynamic unfoldment is possible to each of us, not in some humorless bending of the will toward a certain end, but by freeing ourselves of over-concern with the ego, by trusting in the great good ends of life, by placing our fates and our energies in everlasting hands. A quote by James Russell Lowell. "Thou art not idle. In thy higher sphere thy spirit bends itself to loving tasks." End of quote. Expressing yourself. The most important thing that any of us can learn about willpower itself is that it avails nothing when accompanied by grim concern. The man who moves in accord with his inner self moves in accord with a force that no willpower in the world can possibly alter in the minutest fraction, and he moves joyously. The grim concern of the ego will is simply conscious desire out of joined with subconscious desire, and where these two meet head on, subconscious desire always wins. Far from exerting will against subconscious urgings, a man must first discover his true self by letting down all guards and prejudices and inhibitions, so that the power that makes him what he is can at last flow through. If the image then revealed is too repugnant to either his conscious mind or the laws and rules of society, then he must set about inculcating a new set of reflexes in the subconscious through a method of auto-conditioning. In short, he must remake his psyche. It will be a rare thing, however, if he remakes it in the exact image of his conscious desire. Chances are such desire was false to begin with, having been accumulated in the subconscious through ego conflict and social propaganda. Each of us is the product of a basic force at work in the universe, and each of us, because of the simple fact of his existence in an integral part of the progress of that force through and out of primordial matter into consciousness, into superconsciousness, beyond. Only when we are our natural selves is it possible for us to project the power and mastery which is innate in us. Strangely, the majority of humanity lives in a straitjacket, restricted and repressed on every front of existence, often knowledgeable so, but always justifying such restriction as a being necessary to conformity. And this is the delusion that binds us. The one supreme power and vital mind that inhabits all creatures has not assumed its manifold mask for purposes of uniformity, but for purposes of variety and myriad expression. Conformity of any kind in the development of the psyche and character of the individual should never be anything more than happenstance, occurring only because the true nature of the one individual happens to be like the true nature of another. The object, all the while, should be individual expression. And when this is the motivating force in the life of the person, he immediately increases his worth to society by acting as an absolutely unduplicated sounding rod in the cosmos, contributing his interpretation to all whom he contacts, and therefore becoming a much more valuable member of society than the conformist with his preconceived ideas and predetermined reactions and basically unhappy psyche. The revolutionary concept. So we are faced with the most revolutionary of concepts. One does not attain to self-mastery through an exercise of will, but rather through a search for his secret self, a hidden sense of being that overlays both the conscious and subconscious minds. He may exert will in this direction insofar as the dedication and determination are concerned, but even here, he must exert it joyfully, with humor, else he is sure to be defeated. The door to all secrets is opened with a key. It is simply too strong for a battering ram. A little effort expanded in the right direction and at the right time has the power to move the worlds. If one plays golf, he often sees small men of slight physique many yards beyond their larger and more heavily muscled opponents. Understanding is the thing. Timing and leverage produce the result, and no amount of human energy is sufficient to cause even the tiniest of events that daily occur on life's scene. But a little nudge here, a little pressure there, properly applied on the crescendoing force that is life itself, diverts that fantastic energy into an irresistible stream, and miracles are wrought, bridges and buildings built, societies constructed, all at the behest and after the understanding of an individual consciousness that has transcended its restrictions and limitations and created something surpassing itself. The Olympian Torch. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "He who has mastered any law in his private thoughts is master to that extent of all men whose language he speaks, and of all those into whose language his own can be translated." An eternal discipline sets each individual house in order, allows the self to be mastered and ruled by a power greater than the individual ego, and breeds the stuff of which heroes are made. Tenacity and determination are results of an ingrown faith and unshakable confidence in the great and good ends of life and the worthiness of human destiny. The man who throws up the sponge in the face of overwhelming odds does not so only because the end he seeks does not seem worth the struggle, and any man who pursues his wraiths for ego-aggrandizement alone cannot possibly have the stuff which prevails when the crucible of conflict is heated white. When motivation springs from the depths of consciousness, it is of such strength and irrepressibility that nothing short of destruction of the individual will finally circumvent the goal. An inner vision sustains each entrepreneur. Anyone who seeks to create something is first launched upon his enterprise through having envisaged it in his mind. To see it is to believe, and seeing through the magic of imagination creates the prior vision necessary to action, to bringing an idea into material counterpart in the physical world. Just as nothing daunts the inner vision of seer and saint, so nothing can possibly mitigate against the inner vision of each of us, for there is a transforming power in consciousness that causes material results. In the scene surrounding a given observer, there exist all possibilities, but he is touched only by those his inner awareness is conditioned to perceive. Determination and tenacity are products of inner vision and are never more than symptoms of a consciousness that inspires positive action, steady optimism, and unflagging hope and humor. The really important thing about the evolvement of the human being from out of the mass of half-aware, instinctive, probing protoplasm is the fact that he carries as an Olympian torch the seeds of an evolving consciousness that is struggling upward out of an ascent world of matter. A constantly expanding awareness, an ever greater understanding, and a growing mastery are the obvious ends of evolution, and this evolution now is not nearly so much a material one as a mental or spiritual one, involving consciousness and spirituality to the near exclusion of any physicalness whatever. Everyone's principal business. A friend named Arthur sought his fortune in the world of industry. He had trained himself well for his task and had taken an engineering degree at one of the country's best technical colleges, had served a well-rounded apprenticeship in a major manufacturing company before venturing out on his own. Yet, from the first, his enterprise disappointed. It was a small company, subsisted mainly on contracts from larger firms, and there was no reason why it should immediately make him rich. But considering his personal skill and application and the fact that the processes he rendered were sorely needed, it was strange that he barely managed to meet obligations. His company accumulated no capital, could not expand, and while dozens of ideas for manufacturing innovations seethed constantly in Arthur's mind, there was no means of fulfillment. Other men in positions like his own prospered, and he was sure he was being dogged by his misfortune. The harder he fought against obstacles, the more real and immovable they became. At last, he became a defeatist, confided to friends, "I've had lots of bad breaks and I'm just plain tired. Let the god of misfortune load it on." The god of misfortune did. Arthur lost his business. It was a deep shock. For a while he went about in a daze. The business bankrupted him, and he seemed incapable of going to work. His wife took a clerical job in an office, and they lived on her small salary. All motivation was gone from Arthur. He tried psychotherapy. Seclusion in a monastery was prescribed. Though Arthur professed no religion, he finally agreed to take a 4-month retreat, during which time he promised not to concern himself with business in any way, but to meditate on life, its origins and meanings, the question of who and what he was, what his destiny might be. He was given free access to the monastery library, and though he was required to perform the chores assigned him, nevertheless, he spent long hours poring over the volumes recommended to him by his tutor. When he emerged from the retreat, he was a changed man. There was about him a broader note, a more encompassing perception, a forbearance and understanding for all things that formerly had been narrowly confined to the business he worked in. He started a new business. Almost immediately it prospered. Within a few years it became one of the most successful in the country. Arthur spoke of his transformation. "I always made the mistake," he said, "of thinking that a man could succeed by simply accumulating knowledge about the thing he wanted to do. But I was wrong. I learned during the retreat that something is going on in life that is far greater than making parts for airplanes. No man is here only to seek his livelihood. He carries within him the seed of a budding perfection, and it is only when he turns his eyes within and discovers this precious cargo that he is able to live his life with sufficient reverence for others to bring understanding to his tasks. My success in business has not been because I learned more about my business, but because I learned more about what was outside my business. In fact, it might be said that what I always thought was my business I discovered to be secondary, that my main business is spiritual instead." Golden Towers. There is fierce resolution in the heart of the man who sees golden towers beyond the hill. He is led across desert and wasteland. No matter the obstacles, his image propels him. The secret of never giving up is to implant upon the moving screen of consciousness a clear image of the goal to be attained. Let that image be your golden tower. Guard it from tarnishing, blurring, dissolving, and you need have no fear that you will falter on the way, or resign yourself to defeat, or give up altogether. Let no doubt assail you because the path you tread appears to diverge from the proper direction. There are as many ways to the promised land as there are pilgrims to undertake the journey, and each arrives in due course if only he keeps faith with his golden tower. We all move together toward the same ultimate destiny, but each of us is a separate and unique note in the universe, and each of us must travel his own path for the lessons to be learned there, for the experience to be gained. Thomas Henry Huxley wrote, "Perhaps the most valuable result of all education is the ability to make yourself do the thing you have to do when it ought to be done, whether you like it or not." And it is true that the picture in the mind does not always inspire in us the same enthusiasm for action. Sometimes we are best by laziness and procrastination, and our resolve has to be nourished at the fount of renewed concentration. But it is no use of expostulating. Get to work, when the task at hand is repugnant. The first thing to do, if the job is to be accomplished at all, is to create an entirely new and attractive picture of the task. If, for example, you are a salesman and your job is to make 10 calls each day on prospective purchasers, then you are making it extremely difficult for yourself if your mental image is making 10 calls. With such a mental picture, the wonder is that you are able to stir out of the house at all. Think about 10 calls and they become repetitious. You become anxious to get them over with, to be free of their responsibility on you. Then you think of the driving to be done, the inevitable delays and irritations. Then maybe so-and-so won't be in, maybe such and such isn't taking any more orders, so the entire day will be wasted and you might as well have stayed at home. And sure enough, that is what you wind up doing. Now, the other side of the coin. Instead of thinking of the 10 calls, suppose the image within your consciousness is tied up with success and accomplishment. Your job then is not 10 calls at all, but the systematic and congenial cultivation of every prospective purchaser of your product. The game always has to be worth the candle, and before you can throw yourself wholeheartedly into each challenge with determination and absorption, you must first be positive that right action will bring results. We are so constituted that we absolutely cannot act in any direction without the double-pronged spur of confidence and hope. Visualize your heart's desire. Keep the image fresh and clear. It will act as all the motivation you need to lead you into right and energetic actions. Appropriate discipline. Suppose you are a writer, a painter, anyone whose work is creative and primarily conducted in solitude. When you sit before your easel or desk with idle hands and berate yourself for not working and struggle in the throes of lethargy, when your days become unfruitful and you are frustrated with the burden of your unproductivity, then give a thought to your imagination and the images that are playing upon your plastic creative screen of your mind. We are bound to do the thing that our consciousness is focused upon, and if the image we carry is far afield from the affairs of the world in which we are enmeshed, then we daydream, cannot work, are enraptured by irrelevant pictures that pursue each other across our consciousness. Then we can call our will into play, not a will that attempts to force us to work, but a will that chooses the objects of its contemplation, so that instead of thinking of fishing in the Sierras, we now concentrate our attention upon the task at hand. The mind takes the problem into focus. Possibilities and solutions are considered, and before long our fingers are busily at work, as if with volition of their own. Impulses and whims occasionally spring out of a special attunement of the ego self with the secret self, but far more often bubble up out of a capricious subconscious and are more to be controlled than given into. Usually, impulses are creature comfort urges, and were we to live our lives in obedience to them, it is doubtful we would ever accomplish anything. We would like to lie in bed in the morning rather than get up and go to work, because lying in bed feels good. But if we stay there often enough, we will soon be jobless and without means of support. We would like to load up on ice cream and cake and to eat the things we like as often as our stomach will allow us. But if we do, we soon will have to be transported by truck. We will be so fat. We would like to play and have fun and never to have to worry about others. But if we take such a tack, we one day find ourselves penniless, friendless, without family. The wise man soon learns that impulses and whims are simply the ego seeking surcease from the discipline being imposed upon it. Rather than relax that discipline, he applies it the more strongly. Every human desire must be tempered with appropriate discipline, else it becomes a license, and the knowledge comes to all of us sooner or later that leisure is only valuable after work, eating after hunger, sleeping after tiredness, and it is absolutely impossible to experience a single pleasure in life without a concomitant measure of pain. Super knowledge, not to be confused with impulse and whim, is the welling up out of the universal consciousness of a guidance or a direction that seizes the soul of the individual and directs him unfalteringly along a path that leads to his destiny. The unwary may easily be led to believe an impulse is such guidance or attunement, but once having experienced true rapport with the secret self, any further delusion about which is impulse and which is intuition is put finally to rest. In the wall that separates the human soul from its source, a crack occasionally appears, revealing for a moment the mathematical perfection and utter rightness of the world beyond and the soul within it. It is this psychological state that is referred to in mysticism and in many religions as attunement or grace, and once involved in it, the individual's choices and directions are as warrants from on high. Everything does his bidding at the very moment his bidding is resolved. This aspect of super knowledge gives us our best indication of the nature and usefulness of the will. Once we understand that desire opposed to the aims of the secret self can avail the individual nothing but frustration, then we finally have been awakened to the principle of attunement, which is the secret of effective living. To actually decide is not within the scope of human knowledge, simply because human knowledge is limited to the scantiest fraction of total knowledge. It is just no good trying to make a decision about things when nearly the entire sum of their characteristics is hidden. Individual will exercised against events and people is the sheerest of vanities and avails nothing in the end but suffering and defeat. Acts performed in the ego for advantages are acts performed without understanding of their true significance, and any success or satisfaction achieved through them is like the froth on the crest of a wave, disappearing with the wave. Our consciousness is placed so frontally on our total psyche that we are forever being mesmerized by the blandishments, urgings, and pleadings of the ego. We aspire to conquer peaks that, once climbed, reveal themselves as the lowliest of plateaus, and force us to consider how false our gods have been. True goals are spiritual, and laziness procrastination, and fear are overcome not by railing at the self, but by seeking the sustaining seeds of consciousness that lie deep within the nature. The liberating law. As our understanding grows, so does our willpower. But bear in mind the differentiation. True willpower is effective, achieves results through the mere aiming. False willpower never achieves results at all. As consciousness expands and takes in new levels of awareness, so the power of the individual increases. Achieving increased awareness and communing with higher heavenly powers are not things restricted to the isolated mystic or contemplative saint, but are available to all, and the reward is always complete effectiveness, whether in creative fields or executive, whether spiritual, mental, or material. For in understanding is power, in knowledge surety, and he who has arrived at enlarged consciousness must therefore be able to work his will and weigh on the world simply by becoming one with it. To be what we truly are and to become what we are capable of becoming are the only courses of action open to the man who would live a fulfilled life. No matter the barbs of fate that frustrate you, no matter how stacked against you the cards of fortune, how you were born, where, into what kind of body, gifted with whatever native intelligence, there is a liberating law in the universe, and you can become the highest of the high, wisest of the wise, for you have within your very grasp a tool with which to achieve absolute freedom. Once you have acknowledged to yourself that within your body is that supreme consciousness that has authored the worlds and the universes, then at last you are bound to let the ego step down from the helm and allow a wiser force to chart your course through life. Once you have placed your fortunes and energies in the hands of the secret self, you will know a peace and inner quietude that surpasses any joy you have known. Your life will grow into a whole thing. Each day will serve as a building block towards some definite goal or purpose. You will finally be amazed at the miracles wrought when the secret self takes over. Overcoming guilt and hostility. Guilt and hostility are accoutrements of the ego, which arms itself with delusions in order to survive. If a nagging sense of guilt accompanies you, it is because the ego is made of accumulated things, teachings, blandishments, sensual impressions, none of which have much relation to eternal truth, but nonetheless is a moral censor of every act performed by the individual. If you feel guilty, never make the intellectual mistake of thinking that your feelings arise from the censorship of the secret self, which makes no such lean and human judgments. Guilt is generally the accumulated teachings of society acting within the individual as a prompter or deterrent of certain actions. Such censorship seldom is based on lasting truth, since society's pressures for conformity are often at variance with the divine's pressures for individuality. Hostility is simply the other face of guilt, manifesting as hostility in the aggressive person, just as guilt manifests in the more passive. There is certainly nothing good about either of these emotional blocks. They are products of the ego and vanish when the individual centers himself in the deeper regions of consciousness. Then it becomes nearly impossible to be emotionally involved in the vanities of the little self that is action servant of the secret self. The way to peace of mind lies in abandoning the will as a tool of the ego. Finally, abandoning the ego also and centering the consciousness in the divine. Through the widening of the consciousness that this psychological transference brings, there comes to the individual an understanding that before was impossible to him. In a way that transcends material's explanation, he takes on a little of the identity of everything that crosses his awareness. In this manner, he understands others through actually participating in the consciousness of others, And this super knowledge, this deep intuition, brings to his action and work a high effectiveness and almost supernatural preordination. He moves in the center of events as if he were ordering events, because he moves in accord with their true nature, is guided in all by a principle that sees the end to be accomplished and the means of attaining it, and because he has abandoned ego and moves in response to this universal will. He acts with absolute surety, complete effectiveness, without hazard, anxiety, or fear, is dominated henceforth by inner peace and absolute joy. End of chapter 4. Let's head over to the next video where we continue with this book titled The Magic in Your Mind by U.S. Andersen, and right into chapter 5, Mind Over Matter. Like, share, and subscribe.